Hello, in our next session, we're going to hear about Texas Biodesign, a novel cross-industry and university system collaboration to foster and stimulate convergent healthcare innovation. And to describe this first-of-a-kind collaboration across the University of Texas system, we have Scott Alpert, who's the Chief Business Officer and Administrator for the Department of Breast Surgical Oncology at MD Anderson Center, where he developed and directed surgical device and health IT innovation. So welcome, Scott. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and then go into telling us about the Texas Biodesign?
Great. Thanks, David. No, I appreciate that. My background started out on the research side, running a cardiac surgery lab where I was developing artificial lung technology. And from there, I kind of morphed over to the business side and went to the Texas Medical Center and got involved in innovation and device innovation, did some management consulting, and then took a period to kind of join the startup world and was a co-founder of 4 healthcare tech companies. We were fortunate enough to have 2 of those have a successful exit. After which, getting out of that space, I joined MD Anderson about 3 years ago. And there's a gap in device and technology innovation that existed. And so luckily I was able to join a department with a real supportive chair and an appetite for innovation. So we were able to develop a pipeline and a pathway that's allowed us to basically come up with ideas around surgical devices, medical devices, as well as technology and apps and applications that can improve patient outcomes and patient experience in the cancer space, as well as just in healthcare in general. And so I've kind of stayed in that lane around innovation. And this program that I'm going to describe is something that's kind of been in the back of my head, and a way to accelerate that by utilizing external capabilities outside of healthcare, people that are good at innovation, and they've done it successfully, and leverage that capability into the healthcare space. So as David said, I'm going to talk to you about Texas Biodesign, which is a pet project that's been a long time in the making, but this is a novel cross-industry and university system collaboration to foster and stimulate convergent healthcare innovation. So starting out, innovation is hard. And in healthcare, I think it's exponentially harder than in other areas. And when I talk about innovation, I'm specifically referring to device and technology, not therapeutics, not pharmaceutical, but strictly device and technology. This is a really difficult area to move forward and be successful at, and there's a number of reasons. In healthcare, there's a number of barriers, and I think the top 3 fall into these categories. So there's issues with culture. Healthcare is very risk averse. There's inbred thinking. There's a number of silos, a tremendous amount of bureaucracy, and there's a tendency to focus on no versus yes. So it's very easy to say no because you're not beholden to do anything. And so that culture of risk aversion especially is really tough. Resource-wise, there's funding challenges. There's complexity around intellectual property. There's limited research and development space. There's limited collaboration. Inventor bandwidth from a clinician standpoint is limited, since primarily they're focused on patient care. There's also a large disconnect amongst institutional groups. And then from capability side, in the healthcare space in large institutions, there's really a minimal internal expertise or experience in innovation and commercialization. So there's a little bit of the blind leading the blind. People really don't know what they don't know, and there's a false sense of structure. So the broad aims of when I wanted to put this program together was that I think it's important to encourage out-of-the-box ideas by dissolving the silos that exist and removing the fear of failure. You need to expose inventors to technology across industry boundaries, meaning outside of healthcare. You need to promote exchange of ideas and feedback across disciplines and that complementary technologies to help solve a lot of complex healthcare problems. And then also facilitate links between experts in healthcare, engineering, and business across the University of Texas system. And so at MD Anderson, we're part of the University of Texas system, which is a really, really large educational system or institution with a number of healthcare facilities, higher education, and other capabilities that needs to be taken advantage of. And then also to explore the use of biodesign and its needs-based focus on problem solving. So the impetus behind this program, didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but the precedent had been set on the West Coast at Stanford, where they have a Biodesign Fellowship, and they literally wrote the book on biodesign, which you can see on the screen. And so the phases that we wanted to implement were identifying and screening important unmet healthcare needs, inventing and vetting new technologies to address those needs, and then developing detailed implementation plans to bring the products to market. So the key part of this initial pilot and program was to identify the needs, and that focuses on a couple things. So there's needs finding and needs screening, and not coming out with just a solution to a problem, but what is the need you're trying to solve? That is the primary focus. So the plan was to develop a Biodesign Fellowship at MD Anderson in partnership with UT Austin, specifically the Schools of Engineering and Business and NASA. The focus was to have a needs-driven process for developing new medical device and technology solutions. And then the goal is to put together interdisciplinary teams of researchers, engineers, entrepreneurs, and clinicians, use the needs-driven innovation process to solve medical and business problems. So January of 2021, we had our pilot cohort, and this included 2 departments at MD Anderson, gynecologic oncology and breast surgical oncology. And the purpose was to demonstrate the feasibility and intersystem collaboration between MD Anderson and the UT Austin campus that we could eventually extend across the entire division of surgery and the UT system. So the development timeline was pretty quick. In August, I sat down and I put together an executive summary, picked up the phone and had an initial call with the executive director of the Texas Venture Labs at UT Austin. In October, we put together the main stakeholders and principals and had a brainstorming discussion. By November, we had a curriculum, a syllabus, and a timeline created. And by December, we had an announcement released and had interviews to put the teams together, allowing us to do our initial cohort in January. That completed in March, and we just finished the application process for cohort number 2, and we're doing interviews now for kickoff in February of 2022. So in less than 6 months, we created, discussed, and implemented and piloted this entire program. These are the stakeholders. Myself at MD Anderson, I brought on board 2 faculty surgeons, Christina Cheka from breast surgical oncology and David Baruta from gynecologic oncology. Van Truskett's the lead on the UT Austin side, executive director of the Texas Innovation Center. Rush Bartlett, who's a previous Stanford Biodesign Fellow, developed the curriculum and was the lead instructor. Ashley Jennings, also at UT Austin. Melly Price was the connection with McCombs School of Business. And Chris Romig, who's the head of commercialization at NASA Johnson Space Center, is another connection of mine that I brought in to leverage NASA's capabilities. So Chris was a key contact because what that let us do is it immediately gave us access to every center and directorate across the country that NASA has. So we had access to IP, engineers, expertise from the device and technology side. These are a lot of the, probably not all, but a lot of the capabilities that NASA brings to the table that we are able to leverage because of that connection. So Texas Biodesign was a highly competitive selection process. It resulted in 3 teams of cross-disciplinary individuals from across the UT system. It was highly ambitious. and it's actually the first of its kind program in the UT system. The three teams that were put together developed over 200 needs statements and rapidly navigated through learning and implementing the biodesign process. These are the three teams, and it's a mix of engineering, business, and clinical people, each bringing different skill sets to each one of the teams. We had a pretty accelerated, robust schedule, so there was weekly meetings, Wednesdays from 4 to 5:30, where there was lectures and assignments that were sent out and discussed. Outside of the weekly lectures, each team met with a mentor that were graduates of the Stanford program and have started companies on their own. The teams met with these mentors probably 2 to 3 times a week at minimum, and then towards the end of the program, more than that to get their final pitches ready. In March, after the 7 weeks, each team had narrowed its needs down to 1, maybe 2 needs and presented to this panel. The panel included Tom Crummell, who's the past chair of surgery at Stanford and created their biodesign program. Julie Goodenwardine, who's the chief innovation and HR officer for the entire UT system. Sharon Wood, who's now the provost at UT and the dean of the College of Engineering. And then 2 chairs from MD Anderson, Kelly Hunt, who's the chair of breast surgical oncology, and Karen Lieu, chair of gynecologic oncology. This panel heard the presentations from the 3 teams and gave feedback and some direction on where to go with the solutions that they came up with. So after the program ended, we also had funding. So the Texas Venture Fund was able to provide seed funding to selected teams following the 7-week program. And these funds are being used to further the analysis, prototyping, and testing of the selected team's devices or technology. We're also in the process of putting together a pre-seed innovation fund to help accelerate future innovation type of projects. So after the program, the stakeholders met with and debriefed all 3 teams. We've extended the program for this next cohort, and there'll be a continued lengthening of the course with an expanded curriculum and more clinical immersion. I will say that the entire program and the first cohort, everything was done virtually because of COVID. In the future, we're going to have more opportunity to bring the engineers and business side into the clinical environment. For this next cohort also, there's an opportunity for more departments within the Division of Surgery to be involved. And then we're formalizing this into a more formal Biodesign Innovation Fellowship, which is still in development. And so the goals with that is to have a formal Biodesign Fellowship and to be the internationally recognized leader in medical device and technology innovations that will improve patients' lives. This will accelerate the translation of pioneering devices and technology to improve patient care. And it'll do this by lowering barriers for innovators, identifying value-based solutions with market viability, and educating innovators in interdisciplinary collaboration, translation, and innovation. And we will leverage the resources across the UT system, the MD Anderson campuses, NASA facilities, and then we've also brought on ExxonMobil in the oil and gas space, and we will continue to add other industries to bring additional capability to this program. So lessons learned from this first cohort. Innovators commonly will underinvest time in project identification. Most people jump right into device development, prototyping, and project execution, which is very solution focused. And oftentimes this introduces an unhelpful bias to the problem. Critical thinking and filtering is needed to examine the clinical need before a solution is designed. So the premise here is to avoid creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And then there's a failure to properly understand the pain points outside of one's own experience, which is some of the added value of having these teams put together to give a lot of outside input. Also for the needs-driven process, it's important to be able to learn and write a needs statement. So this is a one-sentence statement, a way to solve a problem in a group or population to achieve a specific result or outcome. So it's a single sentence that focuses on a specific goal. It does not propose a solution, and it provides you a measurable outcome. So we did this program, we put together Texas Biodesign, so what, right? So what happened? So there was 3 teams, as I mentioned before. So the first team, team 1, Christina Cheka and myself were on team 1. After 7 weeks, we had 2 needs. One is a bandage for infection detection, and the second need is a peripheral vascular device. We are working with NASA and licensing IP from NASA and working with their engineers on developing the SSI solution. We're in discussions with ExxonMobil to use some technology from the energy space to input into our device for the vascular side. Our team submitted the invention disclosures to the university, and we've incorporated a startup new company called Longhorn Life Sciences, which will take these 2 devices, hopefully, and commercialize those into the market. Our new company startup has already received funding from the Texas Innovation Center through this endowed scholarship. We're part of Texas Health Catalyst, and we're also raising money on Hornraiser, a UT crowdfunding site. And we've been invited to present to another pitch competition to raise additional funds. So this was all done after just a 7-week program, done virtually. We've never met each other, and we're in the prototyping phase for both devices. Team 2, which David Baruta was on from Gynecologic Oncology, his need statement was a way to identify the presence of bowel injury at the time of laparoscopic surgery in order to enable immediate repair and reduce the rate of reoperation. We've connected David's team with NASA, and they're in discussions with them on leveraging some technology and sensors that they've created for taking their device through the prototyping stage. And then the third team, which included a fellow from Gynecologic Oncology, their need statement was a way to ensure compliance with anti-epileptic drugs for people with epilepsy who are non-adherent to therapy in order to reduce the occurrence of ER visits or hospitalizations. This team has decided not to move forward as a team. They went through the process, they learned the biodesign process, but they ended after the 7 weeks. And so the goal is not to have a device, the goal is not to have a company, but to learn the process of biodesign and needs filtering and needs identification. So we feel like our pilot was very successful in that 2 teams moved forward, 1 team on an accelerated basis with 2 devices and a new startup company. And I'm happy to answer any questions or have discussion. I appreciate the opportunity to present this program to this group. Thank you.
Well, Scott, that was fabulous. I have one quick question. You mentioned the work at Stanford, and then you have this work at UT. You had a good page, had a bunch of bullets, lessons learned, but do you have some advice for people at other academic medical centers who might want to try to get something like this off the ground?
Yes, that's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to step outside your comfort zone. I think when you talk about large institutions, especially if they're not tied to a big university setting, or even small hospitals that don't have the infrastructure, a lot of places feel like they can do everything themselves. And so people that are really, really good at innovation are really not in healthcare. They're in technology, they're in aerospace, they're in energy, is make those connections, create the network, bring in people that understand the process. And your problem has already been solved elsewhere in another industry. And so how do you translate that over to healthcare? So I think it's really just making the connections. And then also, I think there's a level of persistence that needs to be there. You'll come up with the bureaucracy and the barriers will never go away. And it's the individuals that are just willing to kind of, grit their teeth and push through all the roadblocks that are going to be put up. It's very possible. And it's a very, I feel like healthcare should be the most innovative industry. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this. And I think we're in a place right now that the opportunity is definitely there.
And is there usually an office that focuses on commercialization that can maybe provide help to people who are interested in breaking down these silos?
So a lot of institutions will have an Office of Technology Commercialization. Primarily, from my experience, they're focused on the intellectual property protection and making decisions around filing patents or submitting, patent applications. Some institutions will have a ventures group, possibly, or an innovations group. So I think the tech commercialization office is usually your first start. And then if not, there's usually a lot of incubators have been set up in cities around the country that are trying to help out in this space, that you can reach out and probably find some resource that exists wherever you are. And in the world, with COVID and everything being virtual, you're not tied to your one location or your city. I think now with the capability of Zoom and others, you can reach out to people across the country, and you can get a lot of support and resources.
That was interesting. You mentioned a crowdfunding source there in Texas.
Yeah, so having the UT system, again, leveraging that capability, they have that built, they have that in-house. So when we finish the program and we move forward with our 2 devices, they kind of laid out the red carpet as far as what the menu of opportunities was. And it was a great time because it made us put together a pitch video, a whole presentation, which we can leverage elsewhere. And then, utilize that UT system network, which is fairly large.
Okay. Well, Scott, thank you so much for this presentation. It was fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, great.